Okay, so 1.1 is functions. Before we get into functions, who can tell me the difference, or who can tell me what an equation is?
When it be at the very least 3 of 1 sub the actual. And again, I apologize for the loose definition overall, so probably some good one. But still, you have the general finding at least on one side, you have an equal sign, and then you have the other.
Okay, so I have an equal sign, and then I have two things. Let's
Two
see.
statements.
Give me a number. How about 4? Okay. And on this side, I'm going to come up with an equation, x squared plus x minus 2 equals 4, right? First question, should it be x all the time, or could I use a different letter? I could use a different letter. I could have called it as x squared, excuse me, s squared plus s minus 2 equals 4. Either would work. Now that is an equation, and the simple purpose there would be to, what do we usually do? So we are saying that this part is equal to that part, right? So what do we usually do?
We usually attempt to solve it.
We're trying to solve it. In other words, we're trying to find a value of x or a value of s that will satisfy that one single equation. And that equation will really have a function. So the left-hand side part that is a function. Here, it is a function of x, and we typically call it f of x. Over here, it's also a function. Function of s, and we call it f of s. Should it be f? Could I use g of s, h of s? I could do, have those options, but why do we typically go for f? Function starts with the letter f, and that's it. Function of s. That said, what does a function do? So we have a function x squared plus x minus 2. I take that function and I set it equal to one single value, correct? But and for that one single value, here I could find x values which will satisfy that equation. Agree? Now, if instead of having one single value, I call y to be some arbitrary value, and that is equal to x squared plus x minus 2. Right? So one value equation, we can find the values of x that would satisfy that equation. Now I got rid of the single value, and I'm going to set that equal to y, and that y could be any value, right? So for each value of y, I'm going to get a set of x values, which will satisfy that equation. Do you agree? So how many values of y should I pick? How many y's are possible? Infinitely many, right? I could keep on picking as many values as possible. And we could come up with as many x values that would satisfy the equation. Yes? Now, I want you to reverse your thinking. Instead of having multiple values of y, we're going to say, I'll keep on changing the values of x, because I could have as many values as possible for x to agree. And for each value of those x's, do you think that I would come up with the value of y? Is it possible? Absolutely. So here, y is a function of x. The reason for that is the value of y simple example in practice. Do we have cats? A cat, right? If you have cats and, let them wander in the middle of the night, they come and wake you up, early in the morning, right? Let's say y is the time I wake up, and x is the time when my cat comes and paws me in the face, right? So I could say that the time that I wake up is a function of my cat. Do you agree? Yes. So it all depends on what my cat decides to do. And my cat is not always going to wake up or paw me in the face at 4 o'clock, right? It depends on the cat's mood. Regardless, the time I wake up is a function of what my cat decides. Yes. So that's what we mean by y equals f of x. As far as this class is concerned, we're just going to say, well, y will depend on a single variable. If you get to cut 2 and if you have to take cut 3, then y need not depend just on the value of x, rather it could depend on x, y, w, a, b, c, any number of variables. And that's multivariate or multivariate calculus. Are we clear so far?
Yeah.
Okay. In algebra, you must say the 2 ways to represent a function, right? Do we know the 2 ways? Let's just say function y equals f of x. Naturally, putting it in the form of an equation, for instance, y equals x squared plus x minus 2 is the best way possible, right? But there are 2 other ways for us to represent and understand a function. What are those 2 ways?
Is it one of them graph?
Okay. How come I ask a question and everyone's asking me a question? So it is a graph, that's one. What is the other?
Table. A table.
A table, very good. Let's see what those 2 mean, and then we could use our calculator, and I'll show you how to, evaluate functions simply using a calculator. Let's do the table first, and then we can do the graph.
Here's this, for example.
Come again? Oh, no.
I was just talking.
Let's see. Let's consider y equals x cubed. And I want you guys to give maybe 2 values over there, 2 over there.
-2, -1.
-1 and -2, great. Over here,
1 and 2.
1 and 2. Strong recommendation, I don't know if your algebra professor mentioned it ever. I like to use parentheses, square brackets, as much as possible because it will avoid confusion when you do math, especially when you're learning math. Some of those things in Facebook that they put is the answer of this 1 or -1 or 0, and people fight over this. And if you put parentheses properly, we wouldn't have an issue. So, anytime you have an exponent, I recommend that you put parentheses around it. If you're good at math, you don't have to do this, it'll come to you naturally. But if you have difficulty seeing things, parentheses always preferred. Good, and brackets. You will see me using them all the time. So when I plug in -2, what is the value of y? -8. When it is -1, -1, 0, 0, 1, 1, 2, table. So when it is 1, we have 1. When it is 2, we've got A. And same thing, when it is -1, we've got -1, -2, we've got -8. Yes? Connect the dots. We did this in elementary school. That will be the graph. And of course I cheated because I know what the graph will look like. Which is why it's like nice. If you simply connected the dots in your notebook, it would probably look different. But I cheated because I know what that curve will look like. So here we have 2 options. One happens to be a table, the other happens to be a graph. And I made it very clear that having a function expressed as y equals x cubed or y equals f of x is the best way to deal with it. So, but of these 2, which one do you like? Table or the graph? Always the graph, right? The graph gives you a better picture. But sometimes we need to evaluate the function at a single value. And that's where the table comes into play, especially when you do the homework in WebDesign. They probably say evaluate this function of this, and that. I don't want you to sit there and plug in each value and evaluate manually, working hard versus working smart. I'll show you. If you don't know, you can learn now. If you know, that's okay, you already know. We're going to use the calculator and evaluate that function as a table, as well as a graph, very, very important.